You're with Julian on the Brown Note, and a Gone But Forgotten for a movie for a change. Gone But Forgotten, my regular series where something was denied classic status on release, usually an album, or has been completely forgotten about ever since. Hamburger Hill is both. It was derided as a Platoon knockoff, as many of the... Around the era Platoon came out, there were a number of very low-rent Vietnam wannabe movies, and Hamburger Hill I always thought was one of them, but I caught up with it on TV recently and was blown away, actually. It wasn't what I expected. And the John Irvin, the director, has a fascinating, very long career, English film director, and he did the British TV version of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, one of the most acclaimed of its ilk. And lots of other stories as well. Widow's Peak, Dogs of War. He even did the Robin Hood film with Kevin Costner in it. And he's done like 20 films. But Hamburger Hill wasn't particularly well received at the time. It does have 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is interesting. It refers to the Battle of Hamburger Hill. And the guy that wrote it, I think, actually made a documentary in Vietnam around the time this happened. James Karabatsos. So he was actually on the ground when this was happening. It was an astonishing, pivotal turning point in the American public's perception. Basically, the Americans kept trying to go up this enormously high, 3,000-foot high hill in pouring rain and suffering heavy casualties and appearing on the covers of newspapers, sometimes erroneously as well. But overall, it was regarded as a target that had no strategic value and was being pursued for no reason, and it was then immediately just thrown away. But it became sort of synonymous with the destruction of the pointlessness of the Vietnam War and heavy casualties and so on, and led to Nixon actually moving to end American involvement in the war. And I can understand why this film has sort of been forgotten next to the class of something like Platoon or Full Metal Jacket, which were the two really big acclaimed Vietnam War movies around that period. It feels cheesy in its opening sort of half hour or so. The scenarios are often, ones that we've seen over and over again in Vietnam movies. The characterizations are often a little bit more cardboard. But as the movie progresses, it becomes something completely unlike any of the other movies. And I have to say, I think the gold standard of harrowing war movies is obviously the now very famous Come and See from around the same era, about the Nazis going through Belarus and the unspeakable atrocities that nation, which had the highest per capita loss of any in the entire world during World War II, mainly at the hands of these insane Nazi battalions, and how harrowing that film is. The last half an hour of Hamburger Hill is unexpectedly harrowing. I always hated Saving Private Ryan. I always found it trite, if violent. This is nothing like it. It is genuinely leaves you shell-shocked. Nothing in Saving Private Ryan left me shell-shocked at all. Maybe the opening bridge at Omaha beach landing, but none of the denouement at all. But here you genuinely leave shocked. It's also a very interesting film in that it doesn't have much in the way of politicking or wider scope. It focuses on one troop in the war, in this particular one battle, and that is it, the Screaming Eagles, the US Army Sir Battalion on the ridge of Dong Ap Bia near the Lao border, and this one battle and the lead up to it. And the quote that opens the film is pretty good as well, from Major Michael Davis Douglas. If you are able to save for them a place inside of you and save one backward glance when you are leaving for the places they can no longer go, be not ashamed to say you love them, though you may not always have. Take what they left and what they've taught you, and with their dying, and keep it with your own. And in that time when men decide and feel safe to call war insane, take one moment to embrace those gentle heroes you left behind. This was very much a film about not blaming the US soldiers for what happened, about how they were, conscripted into the army and forced to fight in this war and then spat on when they got back home. It's not a gung-ho film in any direction, and the cast is really interesting as well, because there's a Dylan McDermott who's gone on to do a lot of famous stuff, I think maybe really close to the start of his career, and Don Cheadle. I mean, how the hell did he turn up in this 1987 film? We get the usual politicking about race between the GIs, and I really like the sort of the editing and feel, which felt more like a 1970s art film at times, the way that the editing was done, not at all like a sort of post-Platoon film. And the music as well was very, very unexpectedly interesting by Philip Glass, who did the soundtrack. There's so much here that's of intrigue and interest, and once the battle goes into full swing, it becomes amazingly, potently, overwhelmingly harrowing and dark and brutal, and by the time they win the battle, there's no win. This is almost a polar opposite to an ostensibly similar film, We Were Soldiers, with Mel Gibson. But instead of making it ham-fisted and patriotic, it goes completely the other way. There are some scenes towards the end which are just unforgettable. And it's so dark. You really don't even see the enemy much. It's just this one group of people going through the horror of war. And I thought it was one of the most interesting and unusual, by the end, Vietnam War films, and well worth watching. So Hamburger Hill, I'm going to give a 9 out of 10, mainly because even despite its faults in being occasionally cheesy and rote and stereotypical, through parts of it, there are other parts that aren't and are really interesting, and the music and cinematography is often really interesting, and that whole assault on the hill at the end is up there with the most harrowing of war films. So 9 out of 10 for Hamburger Hill.